When I returned home after 3 years abroad, I expected to find my quiet land waiting for me, the same 40 acres my grandfather left behind. Instead, I found bulldozers, construction workers, and 96 brand new homes lined up like soldiers across my property. The sign read, Maplewood Community, a proud HOA development. My name wasn't anywhere. The developers claimed I had sold the land, and the HOA president smugly told me to leave before the police come. But I didn't shout, and I didn't argue. I had something stronger than words, the original undisputed deed to every inch of that land. I let them finish their construction, watched their homes rise from my soil, and smiled quietly. Because when the day came, I'd walk into that courtroom, unfold that paper, and show them what happens when you build your empire on stolen ground. Asterisk, when I first drove down the long, winding road toward my grandfather's old property, I didn't expect to feel such a mix of excitement and dread. It had been 3 years since I'd last seen it. 40 acres of open pasture land, quiet woods, and the little cabin he built with his own hands. That land wasn't just property to me. It was the only thing that felt truly mine. My family had owned it for over 60 years, passed down through generations. I'd left for work overseas, trusting that when I came back, it would be waiting for me exactly as I left it. But life, it seems, had other plans. As I rounded the final bend, I hit the brakes so hard, the tires screeched. For a moment, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. In front of me stood rows upon rows of brand new houses, neat driveways, fresh paint, and tidy lawns. A big sign read, Welcome to Maplewood Estates, a proud HOA community. The sight hit me like a punch in the gut. My land, my family's land, was gone. In its place stood an entire neighborhood I'd never approved, never sold, never even heard about. I parked on the gravel shoulder and got out of my truck, my boots crunching against the newly laid pavement. The air smelled of fresh asphalt and sawdust, not the wild grass and pine I remembered. Construction workers bustled about, hammering and shouting, too busy to notice me. I spotted a man in a yellow hard hat and walked up to him. Hey there, I said, trying to sound calm. Who's in charge around here? The man looked up, wiped sweat from his brow, and said, You mean the HOA president or the site developer? His tone was short, impatient. Either, I said. Can you tell me who owns this land? He frowned and shrugged. This is all HOA property now. Bought fair and square from the developer last year. You looking to buy a house or something? The words barely made sense to me. HOA property. Bought from whom? No, I said slowly. I already own it. He laughed like I'd told him a joke. Yeah, sure you do. You and about 50 others who said the same thing when we broke ground. Then he turned and walked off before I could say another word. I stood there for a long time, watching as bulldozers tore through what used to be my pasture. I could almost see flashes of memory, my father teaching me to mend fences, my grandfather leaning on his cane, smiling proudly at the open fields. Now, it was all gone. But I wasn't the type to yell or make a scene. I simply turned back toward my truck and whispered to myself, let's see how deep this hole goes. That night, I stayed at the cabin near the edge of the property. It was half hidden by trees, untouched by the chaos just beyond the ridge. The porch creaked under my boots, and the door opened with the same familiar groan. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Dust on the old rocking chair, cobwebs in the corners, and my grandfather's framed photo on the mantel. His eyes seemed to watch me, as if waiting for me to do something. I walked over to the loose floorboard by the hearth and pried it open. Beneath it was a small metal lockbox, rusted but intact. Inside were papers, letters, receipts, and most importantly, the original deed to the property. My name was on it, notarized and recorded decades ago. I ran my fingers over the worn edges, the ink faded but still clear. There was no doubt, this was my land, and someone had stolen it out from under me. The next morning, I drove into town to visit the county records office. The clerk behind the counter, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, greeted me politely. When I told him I wanted to check on property ownership records for my grandfather's parcel, his expression changed. That's been transferred, he said cautiously. About a year ago. Developer by the name of Westland Properties bought it, then sold it to the HOA. That's impossible, I said, sliding my deed across the counter. This says otherwise. He studied the paper for a long time, his brow furrowing deeper with every line he read. Then he looked up and lowered his voice. Sir, this is legitimate. The signature on the transfer isn't yours, and the date doesn't line up. Someone forged this. My stomach turned cold. So the HOA thinks they own it. He nodded. They probably do. But if this deed holds, they built an entire neighborhood on land that still legally belongs to you. I thanked him and left quietly, the weight of his words sinking in. As I drove back toward the property, I could already see the construction finishing, bright rooftops glinting in the sunlight, families moving in, kids playing in driveways. I parked far enough away not to be noticed and watched for a while. The HOA president, a well-dressed woman with sharp features and too much confidence, stood near a group of new homeowners, laughing and handing out flyers. I memorized her face. Her name, I'd later learn, was Karen Thompson. She'd made a name for herself in town, strict, controlling, and always right. She didn't know it yet, but every brick laid here was about to become my evidence. That night, as I sat by the fire in my cabin, for the next few weeks, I kept my distance but never my eyes off that land. From the ridge near my cabin, I could see everything, the houses rising one by one, workers moving like ants, and the HOA president, Karen Thompson, parading around as if she owned the world. Every weekend, more families arrived to tour the brand new Maplewood community. They smiled, took pictures, and talked about their forever homes. I stayed silent, almost invisible, watching them build their dream on top of my soil. Most people would have marched straight into court, waving that old deed in everyone's face. But not me. I knew better. I'd learned long ago that timing is everything. If I moved too soon, they'd find loopholes or stall with permits and fake paperwork. But if I waited until they were finished, when the money was spent, the homes were occupied, and the stakes were sky high, then the truth would hit like a hammer. So I waited, patient as stone. Sometimes, I'd drive by slowly, pretending to be a curious buyer. I'd nod at the security guard, park near the show home, and listen. The sales reps were smooth talkers. Maplewood Estates, one of them said proudly to a couple, was once just empty land, but now it's the finest community in the county. Top schools, safe streets, and an HOA that keeps everything in order. I almost laughed out loud. Empty land, they called it. No mention of the man who actually owned it, or the fact that every nail driven into those homes was on land that wasn't theirs to touch. One afternoon, I finally came face to face with Karen. I was walking near the main entrance when she spotted me from her golf cart. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she pulled over. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in that fake friendly tone people use when they already don't like you. "Just admiring the houses," I said casually. "They've come up fast." She smiled tightly. "Yes, we're proud of this development. Are you looking to buy?" I shook my head. "No, I actually own this land, or at least, I used to." Her smile disappeared. "Excuse me." I handed her a copy of my deed, not the original, just a photocopy. She took it, scanned it, then laughed lightly. "Oh, I've seen these before. You're one of those people who think the old ownership still counts. Sorry, sir, but this property has been under HOA management for over a year now. You'll need to contact the developer if you're confused." "I plan to," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but you might want to hold off on selling any more lots until this is cleared up." Her tone sharpened. "I don't take orders from trespassers. If you're not here to buy, you should leave before I call security." I nodded, pocketed my paper, and turned to go. "Call whoever you want," I said over my shoulder, "but remember my face. You'll be seeing it again." I could feel her glare on my back as I walked away, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The seed of doubt was already planted. That night, I drove into town to meet with a lawyer named Henry McCall. He was an old friend of my father's, honest, sharp, and not afraid of a fight. When I laid the deed and the forged transfer papers on his desk, he let out a long whistle. "They really did this," he said. "Built an entire community on stolen land." "Looks that way," I said, "and I want to handle it the right way. No press, no drama, not yet. I just want them to finish first." Henry looked up, curious. "Finish?" I nodded. "If I stop them now, they'll claim damages, say they were misled, drag it out for years. But if I let them complete everything, they'll have nowhere to hide. The buyers, the HOA, the bank, they'll all be tied to it. Then when I pull out the deed in court, they'll have no choice but to come clean." Henry leaned back in his chair, smiling. "That's cold, but I like it." For the next several months, that's exactly what I did. I lived quietly, blending into the background while they built their perfect little neighborhood. Every week I took photos, construction dates, house numbers, property markers. I gathered records from the county office, traced the forged signatures, and followed the money trail back to the shady developer who sold them the land. Every detail became a piece of a puzzle I was building carefully. Meanwhile, Karen and her HOA board were busy patting themselves on the back. They hosted neighborhood barbecues, printed newsletters, and even held a ceremony to honor the community's founding vision. I stood in the crowd during that one, wearing sunglasses and a ball cap. Nobody recognized me, but I recognized all of them, people who believed they were standing on firm ground, unaware it was about to crumble beneath them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked through the edges of the development. Kids were riding bikes, dogs barked behind fences, and porch lights flickered on one by one. It almost looked peaceful. For a moment, I wondered if I was being cruel, but then I remembered my grandfather's voice, calm and steady. "Son, fairness isn't about who smiles more. It's about who tells the truth and who doesn't." By the time the last roof was finished and the final sold sign went up, I knew the moment had come. The HOA thought their world was complete, polished, and untouchable, but they had no idea that the man they dismissed as a trespasser was about to turn their dream into the biggest legal nightmare this county had ever seen. And as I watched the sun set over those 90s perfect little homes, I whispered to myself, let them build. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall. By the time spring rolled around, Maplewood Estates looked like something out of a magazine. The lawns were green, the driveways were spotless, and every mailbox gleamed with the HOA logo stamped proudly on the side. But beneath all that perfection, cracks had already begun to form, not in the concrete, but in the confidence of those who thought they owned the land. It started small. A letter from the county clerk's office arrived at the HOA boardroom, addressed to Maplewood Homeowners Association. Attention, Karen Thompson. The letter stated there was a discrepancy in the land registration records. According to county documents, 2 separate ownership filings existed for the same parcel of land, one under the HOA and one under my name. Karen brushed it off. Of course. She told her board it was probably a clerical error, that she'd handle it. But I knew that letter had shaken her. I kept tabs through my lawyer, Henry, who had filed a quiet title claim on my behalf. It was the first real step in our plan, not a lawsuit, not yet, but a legal question of who the rightful owner was. It forced the county to re-examine the land's history, and that alone was enough to send whispers through Maplewood. Homeowners began asking questions. Some had sunk their entire savings into those houses, and now they were hearing that the land might not belong to them at all. Karen did her best to silence the rumors. She called an emergency HOA meeting, gathered all the residents in the community hall, and stood at the podium with her trademark poise. "These claims are false," she said confidently. "Some man is trying to scam us using old paperwork. Everything is legal, everything is certified, and no one has anything to worry about." The crowd seemed reassured at first, but not for long. One man stood up and asked, "Then why did the county freeze the property taxes this quarter?" Another added, "And why did the title company call me asking for verification of ownership?" Karen's tongue began to falter. She snapped that it was just bureaucratic red tape, but the doubt had already taken root. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, just as planned. I spent my days in that old cabin, filing paperwork, collecting documents, and recording every move they made. The more they tried to cover up, the deeper they sank. Henry told me, "They're panicking, and that's exactly what we want." Then one afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. A man in his mid-40s knocked on my cabin door, looking uneasy. He introduced himself as Michael, one of the Maplewood homeowners. "You probably don't know me," he said, "but I heard about you, the guy who says he owns this place." I didn't deny it. "That's right," I said, gesturing for him to come in. "And you're living on my land." He sighed, looking guilty. "I didn't know, I swear. I bought my home fair and square. But when I tried to refinance last week, the bank said the title was under investigation. That's when I started digging. I saw your name in the records. I had to see for myself." I poured him some coffee and showed him the original deed, yellowed and fragile from age. His eyes widened. "So it's true," he murmured. "Karen told us it was fake." "She can say what she wants," I replied. "But paper doesn't lie." Michael stayed for nearly an hour. He asked what I planned to do, and when I told him I was taking the matter to court, he nodded slowly. "You'll win," he said. "And when you do, I hope you make her pay for every bit of this." After he left, I realized something had shifted. The residents weren't my enemies anymore. They were victims to innocent people who'd been deceived by greed. That made my resolve even stronger. A few days later, things got worse for the HOA. News broke that the developer who sold them the land, Westland Properties, had filed for bankruptcy. Reporters began sniffing around, asking uncomfortable questions about how the transfer had been approved and whether any documents had been forged. Karen tried to dodge the media, but eventually, her polished image started to crumble. She was seen yelling at construction workers, slamming her car door in front of cameras, and even threatening to sue the county clerk for harassment. Henry called me one evening with a grin in his voice. "It's happening," he said. "The county verified your deed as the original. They've officially suspended the HOA's ownership claim until this is resolved. You've got them cornered." But I wasn't celebrating yet. "We're not done," I said. "Not until I see her face in court." Over the next few weeks, Maplewood turned from a picture-perfect community into a place of tension and fear. Homeowners whispered on the sidewalks, "Did you hear about the land case? I think we're going to lose everything." They said our deeds might be invalid. Every rumor brought me closer to justice. One evening, I drove through the neighborhood just to see it up close. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. The houses looked peaceful, quiet, almost too perfect, like a painting hiding cracks beneath the surface. As I passed by the main clubhouse, I saw Karen outside, talking to a group of board members. Her voice carried across the lawn. "I don't care what the lawyers say," she snapped. "That man isn't taking this place from me." I parked at the edge of the street, stepped out, and walked toward her. The moment she saw me, her face went pale. "Evening, Ms. Thompson," I said calmly. "Just thought I'd check on my land." Her jaw clenched. "It's our land, Mr. Blake," she hissed. "You'll lose this case." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I don't think so, because the truth always wins, even if it takes time." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, trembling with anger. The storm was coming, and we both knew it, but only one of us was standing on solid ground. The courthouse stood like a silent monument to justice. Its old stone walls weathered but strong, much like my patience over the past year. When the date for the hearing finally arrived, I was ready. Every paper, every photo, every signature I'd collected was organized neatly in my folder. Henry, my lawyer, looked at me as we walked up the courthouse steps and said, "This is it, Blake. Don't speak unless I tell you to, and when you do, make it count. I nodded, calm and steady. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy. The benches were filled with Maplewood homeowners, HOA board members, and a few local reporters eager for a headline. Karen Thompson sat at the front beside her attorney, wearing her usual smug smile, the kind that said she still believed she could talk her way out of anything. She glanced back at me once, her eyes cold, but I didn't return the look. My focus was on the judge sitting at the bench, flipping through the case documents. When the proceedings began, the HOA's lawyer stood first. His name was Douglas Crane, tall, polished, and arrogant, just like his client. Your Honor, he began, this case is built on outdated paperwork and a misunderstanding of property transfer law. The plaintiff, he motioned toward me dismissively, claims ownership based on a deed that is nearly half a century old. However, the Maplewood Homeowners Association legally purchased this land through proper channels, paid all fees, and developed it into a thriving community. The claim before you is baseless. Henry stood next, his calm presence commanding the room. Your Honor, what the defense calls outdated paperwork is, in fact, the original and still valid deed to the land in question. The transfer they rely on is fraudulent, a forged document filed by a developer who had no legal right to sell the property. And while the HOA may have been unaware at the time, ignorance does not erase ownership. The judge leaned forward. You're saying this development was built on land that never legally changed hands? Yes, Your Honor, Henry said confidently, and we can prove it. Karen's lawyer scoffed. Objection. This so-called proof, Henry cut him off, sliding a folder onto the judge's desk. Within that file, Your Honor, you'll find the notarized original deed, witness statements from the notary's descendants confirming its authenticity, and the results of a forensic handwriting analysis. The signature on the forged transfer doesn't match Mr. Blake's handwriting or anyone authorized to sign on his behalf. The judge took his time reviewing the papers. The room fell silent, broken only by the faint tapping of Karen's heel on the floor. When he finally spoke, his tone was slow and deliberate. Mr. Crane, would you care to explain how a multi-million-dollar development proceeded without verifying rightful ownership? Crane swallowed hard. The HOA relied on assurances from the developer. Your Honor, they were victims in this situation, just like Mr. Blake. Karen couldn't stay quiet any longer. That's not true, she blurted out. We verified everything. We paid for it fair and square. That land was abandoned? The judge turned a sharp eye toward her. Mrs. Thompson, you'll speak only when addressed. But Karen kept going, her voice rising. He's just trying to take everything we've built. He disappeared for years and now shows up pretending to be some victim. Henry stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff has never abandoned his land. He paid taxes up until the county froze the account under the HOA's name. We have receipts to prove it. The judge raised a hand for silence. Enough. I've heard enough from both sides. He turned his gaze toward me. Mr. Blake, is there anything you wish to say before I make my ruling? I stood slowly, every eye in the room fixed on me. Your Honor, I began, I didn't come here to destroy anyone's home. I came here because my family worked for generations to keep that land. It was my grandfather's legacy, and someone stole it. I didn't fight back when they built the first house. I waited because I wanted them to see the value of what they'd taken. And now, standing here, all I ask for is justice, not revenge, just what's right. You could hear a pin drop when I sat down. The judge leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, and then spoke clearly. Based on the evidence presented, the court recognizes Mr. Blake as the sole legal owner of the property known as Maplewood Estates. The HOA's claim of ownership is hereby null and void. All subsequent property transfers are invalid until resolved under Mr. Blake's authority. The room erupted in chaos. Homeowners gasped, some shouting in disbelief. Karen's face went pale as she sank into her seat, shaking her head. Her lawyer tried to speak, but the judge silenced him with a firm gavel strike. Court is adjourned. As the noise grew louder, I stood up, feeling a strange calm wash over me. Henry patted my shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. They're done. Karen stormed up to me, fury in her eyes. You ruined hundreds of lives, she hissed. I looked at her evenly. No, Karen, the developer did. You just built your empire on his lie. She turned away, trembling, as reporters swarmed her for comment. I walked out of that courtroom into the sunlight, the weight of years finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally stood tall against arrogance and greed. That evening, I returned to the cabin. From the porch, I could see the rooftops of Maplewood in the distance, glowing under the fading sun. I thought about my grandfather, about his words, never let anyone take what's yours without a fight. The fight was over, but justice, I realized, wasn't about tearing others down. It was about setting things right, and letting those who thought they were untouchable learn that even the strongest walls can crumble when built on stolen ground. The days following the court's ruling were a whirlwind. News spread fast, faster than I could have imagined. HOA loses land battle after building on private property became the headline plastered across local papers and online blogs. reporters showed up at the gates of Maplewood Estates, cameras flashing, asking residents how it felt to live on land they technically didn't own. The HOA board resigned one by one, and Karen Thompson disappeared from public view. Some said she sold her house overnight and fled the county. Others claimed she was under investigation for fraud. Whatever the truth was, I didn't care anymore. My fight wasn't with her. It was with the system that had let greed bury honesty, and I'd finally dug it back up. When I drove through the neighborhood a week later, the streets were quiet. The same rows of pristine houses now looked ghostly, like the life had drained out of them. For sale signs stood crooked in front yards, and pending investigation notices hung on front doors. Homeowners watched me from their porches as I passed, unsure whether to wave or look away. I didn't blame them. They had been victims to ordinary people who believed they'd bought peace of mind, only to discover they'd built their dreams on stolen ground. I stopped near the old oak tree by the creek, the only thing that still looked like home. It had survived bulldozers, storms, and greed. Its roots ran deep, just like the truth. I stepped out of the truck, leaned against it, and closed my eyes for a moment. For the first time in years, the land felt quiet again. The wind moved through the branches the same way it had when my grandfather used to sit here with me, teaching me how to mend fences or plant seed. Henry called later that afternoon. "The county's finishing the transfer paperwork," he said. "The land's officially back under your name, clean and uncontested." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm not keeping it." There was a pause. "You're selling?" "Not exactly," I said. "I'm donating it." Henry was silent for a beat. "You sure about that? After everything you went through?" I looked out over the hills, where kids' toys still lay forgotten in the grass. "That's exactly why I'm sure," I said. "This land doesn't need to be a monument to a fight. It should be something good again." A few weeks later, the papers were signed. I transferred the entire 40 acres to a government veteran housing program, the same one my father once supported after serving. The plan was to turn Maplewood Estates into a community for veterans and their families, complete with schools, medical clinics, and green spaces. The very ground that had been stolen for greed would now serve those who had sacrificed for others. It felt like the perfect ending, not just for me, but for the land itself. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of planning, rebuilding, and clearing the legal mess. But slowly, the sounds of construction returned, not of profit, but of purpose. I visited often, helping where I could, watching as new foundations took shape. The veterans who arrived to build their homes were grateful and humble. Many of them had no idea about the legal battle that made it possible. They just saw an opportunity for a better life. And that was enough for me. One evening, I stood on the ridge above the valley, watching the sun set over the new development. The air smelled of fresh paint and cut lumber, but this time, it didn't make my stomach twist with anger. It made me smile. I thought about how different everything looked now, and how justice, when done right, doesn't destroy, it restores. A truck pulled up beside me. It was Michael, the homeowner who'd visited my cabin months ago. He stepped out, a smile on his face. "Heard about the donation," he said. "That's one hell of a move." I chuckled. Just seemed like the right thing to do. He looked out at the land, nodding. "You turned a bad story into something good." "Not many people could have done that," I shrugged. "Maybe, but it wasn't about revenge. It was about respect for the land, and for the truth." We stood there for a while, watching as the last light faded. The sound of hammers and laughter echoed across the fields. For the first time, in a long time, the place felt alive, not because of wealth or power, but because of hope. Later that night, I went back to the cabin one last time. The fire crackled softly, and I pulled out my grandfather's photo, setting it on the mantel. "It's done, Grandpa," I whispered. "Your land's in good hands again." Outside, the moon rose high over the hills. The shadows of the new homes stretched long and peaceful across the soil. I closed the cabin door behind me, knowing I might never return to live here again. But I didn't need to. I'd left something behind, not the land, but a legacy of standing up when it mattered most. The next morning, I drove away for the last time. As the road curved and the oak tree disappeared from sight, I felt a strange calm settle in. Some battles you fight to win, others, you fight to heal. And this was both. Justice had been served. The land was free again, and so was I. If you enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, HOA Bright Reality, for more real and inspiring stories that will keep you hooked till the very end.